Alright everybody, welcome back to the history of Russia. We're going to be doing the final Epic History TV video on it today. They're going to be getting into the Russian Revolution. Roger says hey. Scarlet says hey. Alright, are you going to say hey now?
Say hi.
Alright, well here's Scarlet everybody.
Yes, here's me, Scarlet.
Facing the wrong way. Everybody's out that way. Alright. Well, that was Scarlet, everybody. The back of her head, anyway. For some reason, I didn't realize it's been 11 days since I've done the last video on the history of Russia, which is way longer than I had intended. But I do want to revisit that last video, as usual, when I do these series of videos. We're going to do comment time, where I go back and just review some of your comments that address some of my questions from the last video. If you don't want to watch this, skip ahead to the reaction chapter. It's down below, you can click it. But let's go ahead and do comment time. So our first comment is from Stephen Parker. He says, "Hi Sarah, it's good to have you back. The Russian fleet that sailed halfway around the world to get to Japan was the Baltic Fleet. That was, therefore, the quickest way to get there. The Russian-Japanese War is worth studying in greater detail. It had a great impact on both countries later in the century, and for his part in negotiating the peace agreement, Theodore Roosevelt won the Nobel Peace Prize. These events are definitely worth looking at more. I would like to study the I think it was called the Russo-Japanese War." And then there was another comment that also kind of told me the different divisions of the Russian Navy and how they're kind of stationed in different areas. And another one talked about Theodore Roosevelt as well, but we'll get to that in a minute. Now this name, I have no idea how to pronounce. I'm sorry, I'm assuming it's in Russian. You guys can see the name. He or she says that the Bolsheviks is a political party. There was a Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, which later split into Mensheviks and Bolsheviks. The name Menshevik comes from the word minority and Bolshevik majority. There was a much longer part to his comment, but I didn't want to read it all out. It would take too long, but that was the main point right there that I wanted to get to. I did ask what the Bolsheviks was, so it's good to know that it's a political party. Eduardo Serio? Again, I'm probably not saying that right. I apologize. He says that they didn't mention that Lenin, who was in exile, was taken to Russia by the Germans in order to oppose the war, or maybe just create chaos and thus help Germany. By the time fighting in two fronts in World War I. I did not know that about Lenin. I did not know that he was basically taken back to Russia by the Germans for ulterior motives, apparently. Pekka Sotala says, "You listen to those Finnish patriotic songs. They were made during this period. Finland was then an autonomous Grand Duchy of Russia with nationalism rising. Finland eventually declared independence 3 weeks after Lenin's October Revolution. It takes 3 weeks to pass the laws properly." So I guess you're saying Lenin had a hand in Finland getting its independence. But that is something, if you guys haven't seen my video on the Finnish patriotic songs, I'll link to it here, but I had a lot of questions about the lyrics in them because they kept talking about like this kind of like oppressed, Finnish country society. I didn't know what they were referencing, but now I think I have a bit of a better understanding of it, at least in general. I do. And last comment I wanted to bring up was Steve D. Now he did touch on the Theodore Roosevelt thing that we just read, but he says that Roosevelt was rewarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1906 for his role in ending the Russia-Japanese War, which in turn made the USA a major force in world diplomacy. So that's another little tidbit I wanted to add in there that was really interesting. I know it was around this time kind of where the US started to be noticed on the world stage and started to kind of be considered a peer of some of the more powerful countries, I think, or maybe just a little bit prior to this, like during the Industrial Revolution and stuff. Speaking of the Nobel Peace Prize, I just learned about that this morning. I'm doing the Horrible Histories series over on Patreon, and one of the sketches in the episode I watched earlier today was about, I forgot what his first name was, but his last name was Nobel. He was a Swedish scientist, basically, who invented dynamite. He invented the Nobel Peace Prize because he didn't want to be remembered in a negative light for creating dynamite, which, was seen very negatively by a lot of people because it killed a lot of people. So he decided to make the Peace Prize so that he would be remembered in a much better light, which is true. Like, that's what we think of now. But yeah, I didn't know anything about that, so that was interesting to learn about. By the way, if you're interested in Patreon, the link is in the description in the pinned comment. If you want to go check out the horrible histories, I got a lot of other stuff over there too that I can't put up here on YouTube, so I do it over there. All right, again, appreciate your comments. I did look through all of them, even if I didn't include them in comment time. But we're gonna go ahead now and get into the video. Now, Epic History TV did the original Russian Revolution video a while back. I saw that they have now a Russia's Two Revolutions, which is a 2022 re-edit. So I'm assuming that they've probably gone back and included a little bit more information. Some of you guys did mention that there were 2 revolutions. It's not just the single revolution. So I figured I would just do the newer video. Hope that's okay with you guys. Yeah, so 1917, middle of World War I, as I just learned from your comment, that Lenin was basically installed back into Russia to destabilize it for Germany's sake. And we'll go into it and let's learn about the Russian Revolution, which I don't really know anything about, so. Hang on. I shall never agree to a representative form of government because I consider it harmful to the people whom God has entrusted to my care. Well, that's a really interesting take on it, but that just kind of shows you the point of view of people who prefer like a more authoritarian type of government. It's just really opposite to what we think over here in the West. It's interesting. But if you guys could let me know, why does he consider it harmful to the people? Like, what about the representative government is harmful?
In 1894, Nicholas II became ruler of a Russian empire that stretched from the Baltic to the Pacific, inhabited by 126 million people from 194 ethnic groups. It was a country in which workers and peasants lived in poverty and hardship, while Russia's elite, its imperial family and aristocracy, lived lives of gilded luxury. There was a long history of struggle in Russia against the injustices of the system. And in 1905, a revolution forced the Tsar to allow the creation of a State Duma, or National Assembly. But its power was limited, and the compromise pleased neither the Tsar nor the reformers. In 1914, this divided empire was plunged into fresh crisis by World War.
So, based on what he just said, that the Duma, which was supposed to represent the people, Russia still has, I guess, because with recent events I kept reading stuff that would pop up on Twitter regarding the Duma or whatever. But if they were seen as kind of like ineffective because their power was limited or whatever, then I guess that would make some people have kind of a negative opinion of them. So maybe that's why Nicholas said what he did. What is all this talk about? The people's confidence? Let the people merit my confidence.
World War I was a disaster for Tsarist Russia. At the front, the country suffered a series of devastating defeats, while at home there were food shortages and economic chaos. The Tsar was held responsible for the crisis. After all, he was now the army's commander-in-chief, and he was standing in the way of government reform. His German-born wife, Empress Alexandra, was even thought to be supporting Germany, while the entire family was said to have fallen under the spell of a Siberian mystic and faith healer, Grigory Rasputin. In December 1916, Rasputin was murdered by Russian aristocrats, possibly with the help of British secret agents. both groups determined to end his influence over the Tsar. But in the eyes of many, the damage had already been done.
Okay, so I guess that so far is just kind of like a review of everything that we've watched up to this point. Or not everything, but a lot of the last video. Situation is serious. There is anarchy in the capital, government paralyzed, chaotic shooting in the streets.
On the 23rd of February 1917, thousands of women took to the streets of the Russian capital, Petrograd, to mark International Women's Day and protest over bread shortages. The next day, they were joined on the streets by workers and students carrying placards that read, "Down with the Tsar." Troops ordered to put down the disorder mutinied and joined the protesters instead. Tsarist.
See, that's what you would have to do in order to get somebody like Putin out of power, for instance. I think a lot of people are speculating, well, is there a way to like have something like this happen, you know, a coup happen in Russia, or the people, you know, I see people online talking about, well, the Russian people need to rise up and, you know, overthrow Putin or whatever, and everybody's like, oh, it's probably not going to happen, you know, Putin's pretty well entrenched. You know, former KGB, he's got a lot of people surrounding him. I think the situation is, you know, the regular people in Russia just are powerless, maybe, to rise up against, you know, the Russian military, the police, whatever, because they're going to be pretty harsh trying to stop stuff like that from happening. So it would take them kind of turning on Putin as well, I think, in order to have any sort of shot at, you know, overthrowing him or whatever. But I digress.
Officials were arrested. Prisons and police stations were attacked. Emblems of Tsarist rule smashed and burned. The government had lost control of the capital. The Tsar was told by his ministers that order could only be restored and Russia saved from military defeat if he gave up power. So, on the 2nd of March, Nicholas agreed to abdicate. In just 10 days, 300 years of Romanov rule had come to an end.
It took 10 days? What the heck? The provisional government does not possess any real power.
The February Revolution had been remarkably swift and bloodless, and hopes were now high for the creation of a more democratic, more just Russian state. Members of the State Duma, the National Assembly, had formed a provisional government, which was to hold power until a constituent assembly was elected, to give Russia a new constitution. But in reality, the provisional government shared power with the Petrograd Soviet, a council elected by workers and soldiers that controlled the capital's troops, transport, and communications.
Okay.
The Petrograd Soviet, dominated by the Socialist Revolutionary Party and the Marxist Menshevik Party, was much more radical than the provisional government. Yet it supported the government's decision to continue the war and honor the commitments that Russia had made to the Allies. It was a fateful decision that ultimately played into the hands of one of the smaller parties, the Bolsheviks. Their leader, Vladimir Lenin, recently returned from 16 years in exile, bitterly opposed the imperialist war. He also demanded the immediate redistribution of land, from rich landowners to peasants, and the transfer of power from the bourgeois provisional government to the People's Soviets or councils that were springing up across Russia. The Bolshevik program was summed up in a simple slogan: bread, peace, and land. And as Russia's economic and military crisis deepened, its appeal to the masses grew and grew.
Tactics, absolute distrust, no support for the provisional government, Lenin.
In June, a new Russian military offensive ended in disaster, with 400,000 Russian casualties, massive desertions, and the collapse of army morale and discipline. In July, soldiers and sailors in Petrograd mutinied. They were joined in the streets by workers with Bolshevik support. But troops loyal to the provisional government opened fire on the protesters and dispersed the crowds. A police crackdown followed, leading to the arrest of several Bolshevik leaders, including Leon Trotsky.
So this is what Putin's doing right now to keep all of this stuff from happening.
While Lenin, with the help of Joseph Stalin, fled to Finland, traveling with forged papers under the name of Konstantin Ivanov. A socialist and stirring orator named Alexander Kerensky became Russia's new prime minister and was hailed as the man who would save Russia from anarchy.
Hang the German supporters and spies with Lenin at their head and disperse the Soviet.
The army's commander-in-chief, General Kornilov, believed Russia's war effort was being undermined by chaos at home and deliberately sabotaged by men like Lenin, whom he declared a German spy. So in August, he ordered his men to march on Petrograd to restore order. Bolsheviks played a leading role in the city's defense against this attempted military coup. Their most brilliant organizer, Leon Trotsky, was released from prison and sent armed Bolshevik militias, the Red Guards, to defend key points in the city. Strikes by railway workers, many of them Bolshevik supporters, prevented Kornilov from moving his men by rail, and his soldiers began to switch sides, or simply go home. The Kornilov affair cast the Bolsheviks as saviors of the revolution. And by the end of September, they'd gained a majority in the Petrograd Soviet. In October, Lenin decided the time had come. He secretly returned from Finland to Petrograd and began preparing to seize power.
It would be naive to wait for a formal majority for the Bolsheviks. No revolution ever waits for that. History will not forgive us if we do not assume power now, of course.
On the 25th of October, the Bolsheviks made their move. Red Guards and loyal troops seized key points around the capital, and that night they stormed the provisional government's headquarters at the Winter Palace, an event later immortalized by Bolshevik propaganda and the great Soviet filmmaker Sergei Eisenstein.
I should remember this. October 25th is my birthday. Hey, I was born, well, down the road, the same day as the Bolshevik Revolution happened, apparently.
Kerensky fled the city at the last moment, narrowly avoiding capture. And the next day, at the Second All-Russian Congress of Soviets, Lenin announced the overthrow of the provisional government.
If we are not ready to shoot a saboteur and a white guard, what sort of revolution is that? Nothing but talk and bowl of mush. Yeah, well, it seems to be the MO.
The following months saw the Bolsheviks consolidate their hold on power, while fighting a brutal civil war against counter-revolutionary, or White Russian, forces who had foreign support. Some whites hoped to put Tsar Nicholas back on the throne. After his abdication, Nicholas and his family had been held under guard at Tsarskoye Selo, outside Petrograd, where they occupied themselves with gardening and other diversions. In summer 1917, the family was sent to Tobolsk in Siberia, where they lived under house arrest in the governor's mansion.
Look at that little kid. He's even dressed as a soldier. What is he, like 10?
Spring, the Bolsheviks had the family moved to Yekaterinburg. In July 1918, as white forces approached the city, Bolshevik soldiers gathered the whole family in a cellar.
Oh no.
The Tsar, his wife, their son Alexei, their 4 daughters, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia, as well as 4 servants, and executed them all. Russia's Civil War was one of the 20th century's most devastating events. An estimated 2 million soldiers lost their lives, while a typhus epidemic and famine claimed the lives of a further 9 million civilians. By the end of 1921, the Bolsheviks had emerged victorious, and under Lenin's determined and uncompromising leadership, set about building a new socialist order. The Soviet Union, created in 1922, emerged as a world superpower following the defeat of Nazi Germany in World War II. But it would always remain a single-party state, where all opposition or dissent was ruthlessly suppressed. Those brief hopes for Russian democracy that flowered amid the euphoria of the February Revolution were extinguished by the Bolshevik October Revolution and put beyond reach for decades to come.
Wow, so much to digest there. I mean, after he started talking about the Civil War, the casualties of the Civil War, and the typhus epidemic, the Russians had that, and then they were under the control of the Soviet Union in 1922, which I didn't know that was when that was actually established. It goes back further than I thought for some reason. I don't know when I thought it was established, but that's a really long time though, from 1922 to 1991-ish, I guess is when it was disbanded. And I didn't know Lenin was the guy that basically created the Soviet Union either. I just didn't know how it got started. So poor Russia's just been through so much. They've had such a tumultuous history, it seems like, especially in the 20th century. Because they went from all of that we just saw to World War II, which was awful for them as well. And then after that, they had, the Cold War with the Soviet Union. And I feel like after the Soviet Union disbanded, things got better a little bit, and now I think it's going back downhill for them again, unfortunately. And by unfortunately, I don't mean that I support their war in Ukraine. I just mean that I kind of feel bad for the people that live there that have to deal with all of that. Yeah, but that was a really interesting look at the Russian Revolution. Of course, it's just a quick beginner, intro to it. Obviously, there's a lot more that happened, and it is something to learn more in depth about. I have had a lot of people ask me to do the oversimplified videos of the Russian Revolution. I don't know if you guys think that would be too much of a rehash of this video that we just did. If you would like to see me do the oversimplified videos, you can let me know down in the comments. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't done that yet. Also check out the description and pinned comment for my social media links, my Patreon link, my Star Trek podcast link, and my PO box information is in the description if you're looking for that. We'll continue on this topic of Russia, Ukraine. There's a video on the history of Ukraine that I want to watch. While this whole event is happening, it's a good opportunity to learn more about it, or more about the history of it anyway. Stay tuned for all of that, and we'll see you next time.